Hi, this is Mo Volans for Tuts Plus, embarking on my usual batch of tutorials this month for the site that will probably be all published one after the other throughout the next sort of 4 weeks in video form. And in this one, which is the first one I'm recording, we're going to be looking at mastering. And mastering is always a popular subject. It's always something that people are always asking me about. My students ask me about it. And obviously the people that send stuff in to be mixed and mastered, my clients are very interested how they can get the most out of their own masters before they come in, or the pre-masters. And one of the main subjects that sort of needs to be addressed in a lot of the mixes that I get is sort of headroom, dynamics, loudness. Now, it's one of those age-old subjects, especially when it comes to electronic music, because everybody likes their stuff to be pretty upfront, but nobody wants to crush their stuff, crush the life out of it. So it's sort of really important to get that balance. And although I've covered these individual subjects that I'm going to, or individual processes I'm going to use here, I've not really done a video on the whole subject as one. So I'm going to show you a couple of tips and tricks that we can use just to sort of keep things in check and get a good balance between dynamics in your track and making sure everything's still breathing, and getting enough volume so that, you know, enough perceived loudness so that you're up against other tracks. Because even though the loudness war is, you know, hopefully coming to an end and people are starting to think about things a little bit more sensibly with loads of regulations coming in, the reality is that people still like to mix loud. So, you know, you're never going to get around that, I don't think. Not for now, anyway. So let's take a look at this project. It's just a really simple electronica project. And this is the breakdown going into some drums. And then what I'll do is I'll just cycle the drums area once it's back in. And we can see, if we look at this meter, and this is a really useful meter, it's actually part of the T-Rax suite. I use a load of different metering, but this is one that I found really useful for loudness metering, because it gives us a peak here, and then it gives you an RMS level, which is your average level, which is a really good way of sort of getting a feeling of how loud the material is. And then it gives you a perceived loudness. And the cool thing about it is you can go into the loudness suggestion area and put sort of a genre in. And, you know, it's just a guideline, but if we say that this is electronic, you can get sort of a good idea of what's going to be working and what's too loud, and you know, what's not loud enough. Now, currently there's only some sort of bus compression on here. There's no limiting, so as you can see, it's pretty quiet. But what it does mean is we've got loads of headroom. We've got everything from -8 right up until unity gain, right up until 0 dB, before we hit some sort of clips. And I'm just going to get rid of this for a second. So let's open the mixer, and I'll go down to the master bus and we'll see what we've got. Now, currently I've got a bit of bus compression, like I said, and this could be anything really. It could be sort of an SSL compressor, or, you know, a bus compressor, but this is a really nice one from UAD. But ultimately it doesn't really matter what you use as long as it's of decent quality. Let me just stop the playback so we've not got a repetitive loop going on and on. And what I'm doing here is I'm just applying a couple of dB of reduction. This is actually 2 compressors in one, but even if it was 1 compressor, I just apply a couple of dB of reduction. This one, like I say, two different types of compressor in one box, and I've got like a dB, maybe, let's just play it back. Yeah, -1, maybe just over -1 in each compressor, so maybe -2 total. Really just tickling it, just making sure that you've got that consistency, that glue, that cohesion. And what I'd suggest is, and this is the first trick, if you need to apply more than that, you know, if you're going past about -2 or 3, I would suggest performing what I call cascaded processing, which means that you're using more than 1 compressor in your chain. So let's say you've got a compressor right here at the start, and then we've got some EQ, so sort of natives, passive EQ. I often use a Manley massive passive from UAD, and then there's some mid-side processing, which we'll get into in a second. But then you might want to put another compressor after all the EQ and everything. So this would be what I call cascaded compression, you know, more than 1 compressor in the chain, and just put like a tiny amount in. Very reasonable attack and releases. You can leave it on auto release. I mean, I wouldn't really suggest it, but take the makeup gain down. often just have the needle just tickling, so it's like, you know, half a dB. And you can apply that extra glue later in the mix, later in the chain, sorry. So that's one trick for controlling dynamics without getting really nasty artifacts. If you push a compressor too hard, past 3 or 4 dB of reduction, you're going to start hearing artifacts and you're going to start hearing side effects, pumping, etc. If you do it this way, you're a lot less likely to get that. So each process is working half as hard, and you just seem to get a more transparent result doing that. So that's one thing you can do, and you can do the same with EQ. So let's say we've got this passive EQ, and you can see that I'm boosting the high end quite a lot. Realistically, I need to go back to the mix, but let's say you're putting 3 or 4 dB of high end on. You could then use another EQ. Maybe this EQ here, which is a mid-side EQ, but we could add something to the mono content. You can hear it soloing out the frequencies as I do this. So we could add a few dB of high end in this EQ, and we're doing the similar thing that we do with the compression, cascaded sort of processing and repeated processing throughout different compressors. Take the weight off one and spread the load, if you like, between different compressors or different EQs. So once you've got that sort of initial processing done, and I generally do this without any sort of limiting, try and do it as a stage of mixing. And although we're currently in the mix here, I would actually do this as a separate project. I'd export and then do it in a fresh project. Not only does this give you more CPU overhead, but it gives you just a psychological distinction between the two processes. You know, a fresh look at the whole project. Plus, you can pass that pre-master file around for processing elsewhere. So obviously, the last thing, get your metering up, but the last thing is limiting. And I've got a few different limiters here. We've got the Pro L from FabFilter, and one of my favorites at the minute. Can't really, praise this enough, to be fair, is the AOM Invisible Limiter, and it really is something a bit special. I've been using hardware and software limiters for a long time, and this one just seems to just gives you loads of clean volume. Just turn it down in my cans a little bit, so I'm not going to deafen myself. And I'm just going to up the gain here, and all I'm doing is I'm upping input gain, and it's just a brick wall limiter, so you set the output and you can just push level into it until you start seeing gain reduction. Watch the metering, by the way. Let's see what I can fit into this window. It's quite small. Okay, there you go. I think so. We're starting to hit 0 dB, okay? But watch the RMS and perceived loudness as we start to get more gain reduction. So I probably wouldn't go beyond about -5, and this would be pushing it, to be honest with you, for electronica and not for sort of the harder dance stuff. So, you know, if you're working on like a full-on trance track or a house track or dubstep, you'd probably get away with a bit more limiting, but with something a bit sort of softer like this, you know, you really want to go pretty easy. So -12 is perfectly acceptable. I've mastered stuff for clients as far as -8 on their request, so I wouldn't like to do that, but you know, you can do it. Look, but you start to hear distortion. It's not pleasant, to be fair. So just getting into that green area for the suggestion area of electronics. Like I say, this is really cool. This meter gives you a really good idea of where you're at. And this has got an oversampling feature as well, so you get a really clean output out of it, and it ensures there's no intersample peaks and clips. So really true limiting. You can see we've got about an average of about sort of 3-4 dB of reduction, and we're just getting into that green area. Maybe we can go a bit higher. -12 is fine. You know, we've still got movement. You can see there's plenty of air being pushed around in that level. It's not totally squashed, but we've got decent level. You can see even on this meter here, we've got some movement. So the lesson to take home is that I would not push any one processor too hard. If you have to, there's two solutions. One, go back to the mix and fix whatever it is you're trying to fix with the mastering processes, or use another processor later in the chain. And that can be done with compression, it can be done with EQ, and of course you can use multi-band treatments as well, which is another tutorial really. And then use some form of metering to ensure that what you're doing with your dynamics is having a positive effect. And then when you go into your limiting, and here's another limiter, by the way, that I think is very good. Maybe not quite as good as the AOM, but it's got very good sort of visual feedback. So you can see the peaks, exactly how much reduction and exactly where it's happening. We've got oversampling here up to 4 times rather than 16, but nice clean clip-free sound. And very good metering as well. Very, very clear metering. We've got an RMS level down here. So you can see sort of similar limiting amounts. And we're getting up into the green, we're getting to -12. But you can see we're not quite getting that high RMS level that we were with the AOM. We're probably a dB under at the same perceived loudness level. So this is what I'm saying about the AOM. It seems to squeeze a bit more volume out, even though it keeps the dynamics intact. So, you know, that's really a subjective thing possibly, but it's really up to you which one you go for, whatever you feel comfortable with. But while you're doing this limiting, just really watch that metering and really ensure that you're not squashing the hell out of it. Keep that air moving and don't go too high on the RMS or perceived loudness. And hopefully you'll come out with something that sounds punchy, sounds full of volume and full of energy, but isn't squashed. So hopefully that's helped you out a little bit if you are mastering your own material, if you're looking for tips when it comes to dynamics and loudness. Next up, I'm going to move on to something really different in the next video. I'm going to go into Reason, and we're going to look at it, some advanced CV capabilities and some things that you can do that are a bit more creative with CV hookups. As always, comments are welcome, and I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on the direction I'm taking these videos. If you want to see anything new, just let me know and I'll try and fit it in. Cheers.